wabarakatuh. Tomorrow is the Q&A, so just the final reminder to submit your questions on the link below. Inshallah, tomorrow I'll have some time to come up with some answers beforehand so we can give thorough answers for all the questions asked. So without further ado, let's start the topic of the 6th night of Muharram, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ومولاي يا أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين يا حبيب الله العالمين يا أبو القاسم يا مصطفى يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين يا سيد الوصيين يا علي بن أبي طالب السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدتي نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا أبو محمد الحسن بن علي المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليكم مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. All together now inshallah. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the book of wisdom, the Holy Quran, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi will mention on the day of Qiyamah, the Quran will be the intercessor for the one who used the Quran when deriving their morality. Allah mentions in the Holy Quran, Surah 59, verse 19, and be ye not like those who forgot Allah and He made them forget their own souls. Such are the rebellious transgressors. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When it comes to the topic of addiction, you may have an image in your head already. An image which is what we see in the mass media. Something we see all over Facebook, or the social media, or in the news. Something where if you Google the term addiction, the first thing that comes up is an NHS website for me saying about drug addiction, how to combat drug addiction, different things to even tell if you're addicted to drugs, and different things on how you can seek help to get out of that addiction. However, I would like to start this lecture by first defining what is addiction in itself. And inshallah, it will be good if you take this image out of your mind for a second and forget about whether addiction is about drugs, alcohol, or anything else. Just take that out of your mind, all this social conditioning of what an addiction is. Inshallah, I'll read the definition and then we can discuss what a true addiction is. It says in Wikipedia, the Wikipedia definition is: addiction is a brain disorder characterized by compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli despite adverse consequences. Despite the involvement of a number of psychological factors, a biological process, one which is induced by repeated exposure to an addictive stimulus, is the core pathology that drives the development and maintenance of an addiction. So we see that there's two things first. The first thing is it's a compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli despite the adverse consequence. One may ask, why do we even have in the first place something in our body that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that can turn into addiction? First of all, to ask such a question is to really not really understand how beautiful this brain is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Where, for example, this rewarding stimuli is there for you to understand. If I give you an example, if you are eating rotting meat, or you're eating food that will make you ill, these stimuli will not be triggered, and in fact you'll have a different response where you will feel sick, you'll want to vomit, you'll lose all your appetite, you won't want to eat this food anymore. However, if you're given food which is cooked well, it's food that is healthy for you, these reward stimuli will be stimulated so that you eat this food more often, and you become a habit of what food is good for you and what food isn't good for you. The beauty of this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the brain of the human that it can adapt to different environments, different social norms. So for example, whether you're someone who may be in England who eats fish and chips, or someone in Caribbean who may eat something like jerk chicken and rice and peas, or in Central Africa where you may eat jollof rice, or in India where you may eat biryani, that no matter what food that you eat, the stimuli will be triggered as it is a positive thing for the human being, that the body knows that this is something good for you, and it allows the human being's brain to adapt for what that is good for you. So this stimuli is necessary for the adaptation of a human being and for the natural behavior of a human being to understand what is good for them. And as we showed the example of that, the stimuli is there for us to realize what is good food and what is bad food. The definition goes on to say, the two properties that characterize all addictive stimuli are that they are reinforcing. The first thing is that they are reinforcing. The second thing is that they are intrinsically rewarding, that they are somewhat positive, that it gives you something positive. Given that definition, can you go and say the only addictions that we may have is the drugs and the alcohol? Is that the only addictions that we may have? When you look at addiction and you only see these images, is that the only addiction? Is that what I'm talking about when I talk about addiction? No. I'm talking about all those addictions you may have which you feel are unhealthy for you. All those addictions that you may have that may be reinforcing in themselves and may give you something rewarding. For example, if I go on Instagram and I have 2 followers, it may not mean much to me. If I have 3 followers, someone followed me, I'll be like, oh, someone followed me. It may go up again. I get 10 followers, I get 20 followers, until I reach a point where I'm obsessed with this Instagram app. I'm obsessed with social media, and that this, every time I get a follower, it is more rewarding, it is reinforcing, and it is positive for me. And such that it gives me a reward stimuli. It releases something in my brain which causes the reward pathway in my brain to say that this is something rewarding. So that when my brain goes through certain phases, if I'm going through a tough time or something, I may go back to that thing which gives me a positive thing, and my brain may spot this pattern and tell me that it's necessary for me to reach this thing, go for this thing, and it will give me some sort of positive stimuli to get me out of that mess. However, due to our observations, through obvious observations, from when you are a child, you can see that each time that this thing has an effect on you, the effect on your brain is less. What do I mean? For example, if I'm someone who, when I get my first like on Instagram, it gives me a certain high, someone likes my post. If I get the 10th like, the 13th like, it's not the same thing as the first like. It may take for me to get that same high again for me to get 100 likes, yes? The same thing when it comes to money. Money is another thing that can be addictive for us, where we can say the first £100 you make, when you're a child, when you're in high school for example, when you think about what money can I make, you think, oh, £100 is a high value, if I can make £100. And sometimes you may see some students, like myself when I was in high school, I used to go to Sainsbury's, buy some donuts, sell them to people at my school, and make maybe 20p every day, and by the end of the week I make £1. I'd be so excited by that. But when you grow up, making £1 is nothing. You need more money, you need more money, till you reach a point where you say, I need to make £1 million to be happy. And then you reach another point, I need to make £1 billion to be happy. You can see from this thing that each time that you get this reward stimuli, the effect of the next one is less. And this is what leads to addiction. This is what leads to people who start off with something like a gateway drug, and then they go on to harsher drugs and harsher drugs. The same things happens with our soul, where we may be able to see addiction from a physical standpoint on what narcotics does to us. But we don't focus on the things where we may be saying that we are all addicted to something. What do I mean? What I mean by this is that when you sin, for example, let me talk about the certain sins, the popular sins that people may do. One sin may be lying, if you're lying to someone. Another sin may be, for example, theft, stealing. A third sin may be to commit adultery. All three of these sins are sins which the human being goes through, participates in because of ease. What I mean is because of not wanting to face the reality of the situation, it's easier to lie. Of not wanting to make a halal living and going through the pain of working a strenuous job, you may want to steal, etc., etc. For all the sins you can say a similar story, where we're addicted to the idea of getting something easy in life. We're addicted to the easy way out, aren't we? So it's important that when we do our certain acts and we do certain sins, we remember, and that when we repent, that we have a real self-reflection and we try and make sure that such a sin does not occur again. I can give you another example. The first thing, for example, we have a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, where Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, in children I love a few things. One of those things that I love of a child is that when they make a mistake, they really see the pain of that mistake. Have you seen, for example, one time where a child may drop something over and their parent isn't there? How much stress do they go through? How much anxiety do they go through? Why? Because they do not want to face their parent because of what this has happened. That they drop something over and their parent might get angry with them. They're scared for the consequences. They see actions, when they do something bad, they see how truly bad it is, and it really affects their soul. The same way a child does that, as they grow up and up, you see that these things start to wear off. And for example, the first time, let's say someone who recites salah on a daily basis, they recite salah on a very on-time basis. Maybe one day they do it late, not even qaza. They do it late one time. The first time they may do it, they may think, oh no, I've done my salah late. This is terrible. Maybe it happens a second time. Maybe it happens a third time. Till the point where they're not even doing salah on time anymore, and sometimes they may even do qada. And then they may not even make up the qada. And sometimes you hear people say, oh, don't worry, I'll make it up on Laylatul Qadr. Laylatul Qadr, I'll do 100 rakat salah. If you cannot do 5 salah in one day, you cannot do all the 5 namaz in one day, how do you think you're going to do 100 rakat on Laylatul Qadr, on one night? It's important for us that when we sin, we really self-reflect on that sin, so that we don't allow it to turn into a habit, turn into an addiction, because that's what it is. It's an addiction in our mind, because it's something where we have missed something that is good for us, and it may be because it's easy. For example, when I lie, I may lie to my boss and say that this piece of work, it's going to take 10 days to do instead of 1 day. Why? Because it's easier for me. It makes my job much easier. I can lie about, I can mess around, I don't have to do my job properly. But at the same time, if I do this again and again, it's going to change the way that I work. It's going to change my integrity of my work. And last night we spoke about how Islam is with the workplace. So the same way, we must make sure directly that we really reflect when we do such sins. I want to speak firstly from a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. In Quran al-Hikam, number 4522, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam mentions, take charge of the discipline of yourselves and shift them away from their rough habits. Meaning, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam is mentioning that we must take charge and discipline ourselves so that we stay away from the rough habits. Meaning that you always need to have a self-reflection and take charge and have discipline of yourself. You never feel that you are someone who doesn't need discipline anymore. Every day you have that self-reflection. No, not every day. 5 times a day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions to us to have that self-reflection. Does He not? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason for the rahmah of salah is that we can have 5 salah in one day. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the human being, knows that throughout the day the human being might be distracted from certain things. The human being might be distracted from work. They might be distracted from other people. They may be distracted from all kinds of things around you trying to distract you. Allah says 5 times a day you pray to me so you can recalibrate your distraction. Imam Ali alayhi salam mentions, take charge and discipline yourself. Every time you do salah, remember to take charge of yourself. Discipline yourself. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi mentions in another hadith that through constant self-struggle our bad habits overcome. Meaning that when we have these bad habits that are forming, it is important for us to have that self-struggle. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi knows that it's a self-struggle. He knows it's a struggle. It's not supposed to be easy. Sometimes people may think that this is an easy job, I'm going to do this. For example, some people may say, I'm going to quit smoking in one day. They may find it and think of it as an easy task, and that may come back to haunt them. Whereas if you understand the task is a tough task, you understand that this is a real test of your abilities, this is a real method, a potential for you to reach, where you can reach the peak of mankind, you can reach your potential if you take part in this. And the rewards are magnificent. If you know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that it's a constant self-struggle, that you know what you're going to get yourself into. In another hadith from Ghurar al-Hikam, number 4761, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam mentions, struggle against yourself in Allah's worship, just as one fights one's enemy, and overcome it, just as one overcomes one's opponent. For the strongest of people is he who is triumphant over himself. Subhanallah. When you think about fighting someone, let's say, when you think about going to war, and you think about the enemies that may be in that war. For example, there may be a warrior who's been practicing how to fight for 20, 30 years. The fear that you'll have in that. The way that you will prepare yourself for that war. The way you will prepare yourself how to fight this person, to defend yourself. You will practice. If there were videos of this individual, how they fight, how they fought previous opponents, you would watch every single one of those videos and try and change your game so that you can, stop this person from attacking you when you have this fight. As Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, to worship Allah, struggle against yourself in Allah's worship, just as one fights one's enemy and overcome it, just as one overcomes one's opponent. So the same way you overcome your opponent. For the strongest of people isn't the one who has 200 kg of muscle. No, the strongest of people is the one who is triumphant over himself. This is the beautiful saying from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Another hadith in Ghurar al-Hikam, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, a habit holds every man under its authority. And we know that, don't we? We know that when you have such habits, they change you in such a way that you lose the authority, you lose the identity of yourself. Because don't we all want to be free? Aren't we always told constantly from the media, everyone, oh, free your mind, free your soul. This country is the land of the free. This country is the land of the brave. You want to be free, join this country. Do we not hear that all the time? The reason that the media may say that, and certain countries may have a slogan that we are the land of the free, is because they truly understand that the human being inside of them has something, a love and a particular movement towards having true freedom, because it's an instinctive thing, and they just use that slogan for their own propaganda, of course. However, we all know that through our own observations that everyone wants to be free. So Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, a habit holds every man under his authority. Another hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says, your tongue will urge you to whatever you have accustomed it to say, and your inner self will require you to do whatever you have made it fond of. The same way we mentioned earlier, that if you make yourself fond of certain things that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is saying that yes, your inner self will require you to do that. If you make yourself fond of not praying salah, if you make yourself fond of leaving what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, if you make yourself fond of drinking alcohol or doing drugs, if you make yourself fond of constantly lying to your boss, then that is what your inner soul, it will become second nature. The first time when you're a child, it may be a real shock to your system. But if you keep doing it to yourself, it will become second nature. Which is why Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam mentions in a beautiful hadith, when it comes to a young person, their heart is like an uncultivated piece of land. If you throw something at it, then that land will just accept anything that you throw at it. Meaning that the young person's heart, if you throw at it certain habits, they'll pick up those habits. I mentioned about family life, work-life balance last night, didn't I? That if you speak certain ways in front of your children, if you speak about certain people, you joke about certain people, you backbite against certain people in front of your children will take this habit on board and it'll be inside of them. And it'll be much more difficult for your children to let go of this. So Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, your tongue will urge you to do whatever you've become accustomed with. Yes? Some people also are addicted to using foul language. Yes? If you see some certain social circles, people with their friends, the way they talk to them, you'd be very shocked the way they speak to them. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to speak with a purified mouth. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, your tongue will urge you to do whatever you have become accustomed with. So guard it. Guard your tongue. Don't speak in a certain way. Speak in the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to speak. Speak in a way which gives you nobility. And your inner self will require you to do whatever you want, you have made it fond of. In another hadith from Ghurar al-Hikam, Imam Ali alayhi salam says again, do not hasten to resort to anger, lest it prevail over you by becoming a habit. Sometimes people have this whole addiction to anger. They may think it's the smallest thing happens, they're going to go in anger, they're going to have a rage. You see now Incredible Hulk, the way they want to trigger the Incredible Hulk, they say the smallest thing, so they can trigger him to come into the Hulk. Some people, it becomes a habit, doesn't it? Where sometimes you may feel angry, and the next time you think, okay, I'm going to be angry again, and you get angrier and angrier, then you turn into someone where nobody wants to be around. You turn into someone where you get so angry that people are walking on eggshells around you. You've always heard this saying. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, change your habits. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, do not hasten to resort to anger lest it prevail over you by becoming a habit. Meaning that whether it's anger, whether it's missing salah, do not hasten to do these things. Do not hasten to try and promote these bad habits that we have. Inshallah. In another hadith, in Ghurar al-Hikam, we see Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhimus salam mentions, do not hasten to resort to anger lest it prevail over you by becoming a habit. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is giving us a beautiful piece of advice here. The same way, maybe one time your fuse has been broken. Let's say you're someone who's very calm, but one time you get angry. The next time you see, and this is a common thing, the next time, is it the same amount of effort needed to make you angry, or is it less effort? Usually it's less effort, less effort, less effort, less effort. Until you reach a point where you get angry over nothing. Someone just walks into the house and they don't say salam to you or something. You get very angry. You say, why are you not saying salam to me, for example? This is one example. Where you become someone where it becomes a habit to get angry because you believe that getting angry makes you feel a different way, right? Because when you get angry, sometimes it may feel that I had to let that out of my soul. I had to let that out of myself. Don't keep it bottled up is what they say. Yet Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is not saying that. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is saying something different. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is saying, do not hasten to resort to anger. Anger is not the only way. Do not think just because it may give you a short high. It may make you feel happy for a short time. It may make your stress go away for a short time. Do not hasten towards it. Otherwise, it will prevail over you and become a habit. And we all know the consequences of anger, how it can ruin relationships, how anger can ruin your life. You may not have any friends afterwards after you become someone who's so angry. We see another hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam where he mentions the best of worship is to overcome one's habit. Meaning that those people, no matter what worship you do, whether that's dhikr, whether that's through salah, and inshallah we'll speak about these things, how they can help you in forming such habits, in taking away such bad habits and giving you good habits. How this can change you into something where you can use it as worship for overcoming one's bad habit. Yes? We also see in another hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the most difficult of things to manage is the removal of habits. We saw Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam said earlier about the example of the child where he has uncultivated piece of land. His heart is, wherever you throw it, it will accept. Yes? So if you throw something at a child's heart from that age where they're not subjugated to any sort of thing at that point, then it will be harder for them later on, because obviously when an uncultivated piece of land is there and it becomes cultivated, then it's harder to change that piece of land. It changes and turns into a certain way. That Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam saying the most difficult of things to manage is the removal of habits, meaning that the way we speak with our children is very important. That it's much harder, the same way you see in medicine when you talk about, for example, the coronavirus. You say the best way is prevention rather than treatment. Trying to treat coronavirus is a lot more difficult. You might as well try and not get it in the first place. We see another beautiful hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam where he says that he was once offered a sweet, some Arab sweet, and in the hadith it mentions it's called faludaj. If any of the viewers are Arab and they know this sweet, that's what it's called. So he placed it in front of him, saying, verily you have a fragrant smell and are beautiful in color and you taste delicious. but I hate to habituate my soul with anything since it has not yet formed any habits. This is the class of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is the perfect human being. This is the one where when they see anything that may change them, anything that may cause them a habit, the same way I said to you earlier, habits, addictions are not only just drugs, they could be food as well. In this example, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is saying, I saw a piece of food that looked beautiful in color. It looked beautiful. And I know it tastes beautiful. But I would hate to habituate my soul since it has not yet formed any habits. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam does not want to be habituated to anything. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam wants to only be towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when you form certain habits, those habits will take you away from the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see this, for example, when you have the habit and you look forward to watching a football match. When a football match is on, who watches a football match and stops at the 30th minute or the 90th minute or the 80th minute? Just when the match is going to end, it's the most exciting piece of the match. It's salah time. What are we going to do? We're going to wait for the match to end. Sometimes maybe we'll see the post-match interviews. We want to wait for the manager to come out. You want to hear what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer said. You want to hear what Bruno Fernandes has said. Maybe if you're a Manchester United fan. Or if you're not, I don't know what you want to hear. I don't know why you watch football. We see, now we go on to the part of the lecture when we talk about what Islam says in terms of a step-by-step method in the Holy Quran on how we can try and get rid of these bad habits. We see, for example, as we know, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wine and gambling was a big thing. So the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 219, they mention that they ask you about wine and gambling. Say, in them is great sin, yet some benefit for people. Subhanallah, what a beautiful verse. But their sin is greater than their benefit. And they ask you what they should spend. Say, the excess beyond the needs. Thus Allah makes clear to you the verses of revelation that you might give thought. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah is mentioning to us that we must, at the end of the verse he says, thus Allah makes clear to you the verses that you might give thought. That when you think about the Quran, Allah gives you verses. Think about this Quran. We see above where it says about wine and gambling. Say, Ya Rasulullah, say, in them is a great sin, but there is some benefit. Yes. Think about both sides of the story. And then remember the consequences of this action. Remember the consequences of wine and gambling the same way. Think of whether it's social media. Let's take that example. Think of if I'm obsessed with social media. Yes, the benefit of it is it makes me feel better. But what is the disadvantage of being obsessed with social media? The disadvantage is that you can no longer focus on real life things that are happening in your life. You may not be able to focus on, for example, paying the bills. Or religiously, you may not be able to focus on worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You may get so ingrained into your own personal brand that you just care about yourself. You don't care about anyone unless they like your photo. For example, you might see someone, you might think, oh, I don't like this person. But when they like your photo, when you see that like, you think, okay, let me give them a bit of attention. You do something for me on social media, I do something for you. In this way, you let social media run your life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, remember the benefit for the people, but the sin is greater than the benefit. Remember the sin. Remember the disaster of doing such actions. Have that self-contemplation, because self-reflection is the greatest of things. Self-reflection is what can get you out of any sort of situation. We see in an example with Imam Rida alayhi salam, as reported in Ayun al-Akbar al-Rida, we see that one day a companion approached Imam Rida alayhi salam and said, I was someone who went to a lot of parties. I was someone who was madly addicted to music. Now I want to repent, Ya Imam Rida. Kindly tell me, what should I do? This is a beautiful question this man has asked Imam Rida alayhi salam as a great example, and inshallah we'll hear the answer. Imam Rida alayhi salam mentions first, get up and do ghusl. Go do ghusl. Ghusl is a beautiful thing. Showering. Having that feeling of when you shower, that you're washing away your sins, for example. That this is something you're doing out of the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Get up and do ghusl. And he mentioned, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi would mention, there is no one whom Allah did not forgive if that man had made a repentance corresponding to his sins. And then he said to him, O companion, get up, do your ghusl and prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever addiction there is, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is not a sin that is not forgivable. And Allah never turns away from the sinner. That if you go and do the ghusl of tawbah, and you go and prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will accept your forgiveness. Of course, if you do it with the best of intentions. We see in Surah Al-Isra, and we get to the Holy Quran, where it says, and we derive from the Quran the healing and the mercy of the believers, because we want to find out today, inshaAllah, what is the healing of the Islam mentions from the Holy Quran and the Hadith of Ahlul Bayt. So far we've mentioned that one thing that the Hadith say is to do ghusl. Another thing is to prostrate to Allah, to ask for forgiveness of Allah. We mentioned in the earlier verse of the Holy Quran that it mentions to remember the benefit of doing this act in terms of how will it benefit you, but remember the sin of it as well. Remember the disastrous nature of this sin, how it will take you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first thing to remember, the third thing to remember, the next thing to remember is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching you. In Surah An-Nisa, verse number 1, it mentions, indeed Allah is ever over you, an observer. Think about this verse, think about it. In the sense that this universe has been in existence, we don't know how long, but we estimate billions and billions of years it's been in existence. Our life, let's take someone, let's say they're 90 years old. Let's say a lifespan lasts 90 years old. And you have 90 years of living. And we know that however big the universe is, we know that after we die, our soul will go somewhere and it will ideally live forever, in the sense. Yet, this 90 years, which is so limited, it's not even a fraction of what the rest of our existence of our soul is. That we must remember that every single action, every second that we do, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. That Allah is watching every act that you do. So on the day of judgment, that it will be critically analyzed. It will be analyzed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He will mention if you're someone deserving of heaven or hellfire. Remember, brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching. The same way, would you do a certain sin in front of your parents? If your parents were around and you were addicted to a certain thing, a certain substance, let's say, would you do that substance in front of them? Why would you do it in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If you remember, if you keep reminding yourself, of course it's all about reminders, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. And the reason why my first lecture of this series was reminding us why we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the first place. Why we take Islam as the correct religion to follow out of all options of religion, was to remind us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. Allah is watching us. Indeed, Allah is ever over you, an observer. Another thing we can do is believe that Allah can help you. Because brothers and sisters, it all comes from this belief. There's no point thinking I can do this, this and this if you don't even believe in the first place. You have to have the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the same way that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi would mention, the one who knows himself knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the one who knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can know themselves. That to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to have that confidence inside you. That belief inside you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a beautiful connection. And Allah truly speaks to the heart in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 186, when He says, and when my servants ask you, O Muhammad, concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me. So let them respond to me by obedience and believe in me, that they may be rightly guided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying a beautiful thing. That I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there for you at any moment. That you can rely, that everything, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can help you, can support you in doing righteous deeds. And inshallah, tomorrow our lecture is on free will and predestination, where we will analyze this in more depth. But the second thing is remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can help you. We see in another hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, where it says, again, the best form of worship is breaking a habit or an addiction, as we already mentioned. Another thing is doing zikr, doing the dhikr of Allah, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see in Surah Al-Ra'd, verse 28, it mentions that it is the believers and their hearts are at rest in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, only by remembering Allah is the heart at peace. We know that in our lives, when we are addicted to something and we understand and acknowledge that we are addicted to it, that we know our hearts are not at peace. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, how can our hearts be at peace? By remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we do these things? I touched upon one of them earlier. In Surah Al Imran, verse 135, it mentions, and those who, when they commit an immorality or wrong themselves, remember Allah and seek forgiveness for their sins. And who can forgive sins except Allah? And who do not persist in what they have done while they know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again is saying, remember me. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When He says, when they commit an immorality or wrong themselves, because of course we know, Allah is as if telling us, if you are addicted to certain habits which take you against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first acknowledge them. First have that self-remembrance, self-reflection, that yes, I am addicted to something that takes me away from you, Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that I have wronged myself. It says, if my servants have wronged themselves, then remember Allah and seek forgiveness for their sins. Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, one thing we can do is recite salah. Recite our prayers, our obligatory prayers. If we take these prayers seriously, and we do these prayers 5 times a day, we realize that this is something that can make us remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more. If we really take issue with the prayer, and we really take every second of that prayer as something where we're actually remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this can be extremely beneficial. And we see in Surah Ankabut, verse 45, that Allah mentions, recite what has been revealed to you of the book and keep up the salah. Surely salah forbids obscenity and malfeasance. And indeed the remembrance of Allah is greater. Surely salah forbids obscenity. Yes. That if you recite salah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us what salah can do to us. If we're doing salah properly, it would forbid us from doing any obscenities, doing anything against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's salah as well. Another thing is ittiqaf, where you may have heard of it, maybe from your local mosque, where you may even heard from those from non-Muslims when they speak about, for example, one method of stopping and trying to solve certain addictions is taking someone in the wilderness, stopping them from having any access to any sort of drugs or anything that they're addicted to, and leaving them there and hoping that they cope with it. Ittiqaf is an Islamic version of this, where it mentions instead that it's something where you stay in the mosque, you fast for the day, you have no access to the outside world, you have no access to your mobile phone, for example, and you have maybe a set of books so that you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because let me tell you, brothers and sisters, that there are 2 aspects of this. The first is fasting. And we realize from fasting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 183. O you who believe, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, that you may develop taqwa, you may develop piety, you may develop God consciousness. That fasting is something for us to develop God consciousness. So we see that with fasting, for example, the reason, one of the hikmah behind fasting causing us God consciousness is because obviously it allows us to really remember what's important. Where, for example, let me give you the example, when you're ill, when you have a certain illness, when you have something that it makes you bedridden, how does it affect your body? It affects your body in such a way that it ruins your appetite. For example, the food that you loved, you don't want to eat that food anymore. It changes, your mindset changes in a way, because your mindset, your brain is now fighting a disease, it's fighting a virus, it's fighting some sort of bacteria inside of it, that your mind changes its state in a way that it focuses on those things which are important. The same way with fasting, when we're not eating, our body craves for food. So our body, our minds change in a way that it focuses on finding food to solve this hunger, rather than those acts which may be something of luxuries. Because if you think about it, These habits may only come about from having excess time on your hands. Where you have so much in the world that you may think, okay, I need something more. I need social media. I need something more. I need money. I need something more. I'm not feeling fulfilled anymore. I need something like a drug, for example. Where fasting is something which makes you realize the beauty of religion, the beauty of living, the beauty of what you have. How thankful you should be for what you have. And this is why fasting is another thing that is highly recommended to try and get out of this issue of being addicted to certain things. We see in ihtikaf, that it is that you go and fast for a day in a mosque, but you also stay there. And sometimes they mention that you stay there for 10 days. There's a set period of time. And that you lock off from the outside world. Maybe you have certain books. Why do you do this? The benefit of this is great. Where if you stay in a mosque and you don't have access to the outside world, your mind starts thinking. Because you may, at first, get bored. You may think, what am I going to do without my phone? I'm so addicted to my phone. I'm so addicted to my cigarettes. What am I going to do without any of these things? You may think ihtikaf is an example where you may have this initial fear. You may have this thing, how am I going to last 10 days? And then your brain might go into thinking and contemplating and giving your time self-reflection, which is the whole theme of this series. That self-reflection is the best thing to combat anything, any ailment in Islam. Which is why it's recommended, ihtikaf in Surah Al-Baqarah. Verse 125, when it mentions, and we enjoined Ibrahim and Ismail, saying, purify my house for those who visit it and those who abide in it for devotion. Those who abide in the house of Allah for devotion. In the mosque, abide in the house for devotion. Those who bow down and those who prostrate themselves. That this is a moment for you to stay in the mosque and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To contemplate, think about the existence of yourself. Think about, read the Holy Quran. And something I read beautiful from Sayyid As-Sistani in his biography the other day. He mentioned that he always kept a pocket-sized Quran with him. And when he keeps his Quran with him, every time he has a free moment, he says, I take the Quran out and start speaking the words of the Holy Quran. And he said a beautiful thing. He said, it's as if he remembers that these are the words of purity. It's purification for my breath. It's purification for my soul. Because if you remember, these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the words of divinity. These are the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. These are words from Allah, and that for me to recite these words is a beautiful thing for my soul. The fact that I even have the capability to recite the Quran is a beautiful thing. So do dhikr. Another thing that I've heard from certain brothers is that when they do this ihtikaf, that they really try and worship Allah and think about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Focus on the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Focus on, for example, Ar-Rahman. Focus on Al-Kabir. Focus on Ar-Rahim. Focus on these names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And try and understand them better. Because obviously there's a hikmah behind why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has these 99 names ascribed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's that as well. Fasting. Staying in a mosque. Being cut off from the outside world. And focusing on self-reflection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also have another thing. For example, when you see Ziyat Ashura, sometimes you see in certain books it says recite this for 40 mornings. Or you see Dua Ahad, recite this for 40 mornings. Why? The same way I mentioned earlier about habits which we can form in our lives. Where we can try and replace bad habits with the good habits. Where, for example, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi mentions, as recorded in Ayun al-Akbar, Ar-Rada, no sooner does a servant spend his mornings in a state of sincere devotion for 40 days, then the springs of wisdom will flow from his heart onto his tongue. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi mentions 40 days. If you spend the mornings in a state of sincere devotion for 40 days, the springs of wisdom will flow from the heart to your tongue. Why is that? Because if you do something for 40 days, this is amount of time for you to start having a habit. If you start having a habit that I'm going to recite this dua for 40 days, then after those 40 days, of course, you're going to recite this dua. It's going to be part of your habit. If you have this habit where you're going to recite salah on time, exactly on time, not so that you get it out of the way, but because you want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this is something that's going to stay with you forever, for a prolonged period of time. This is another thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes for us to do. Try and come up with the good habits to try and cancel out the bad habits. Another thing which we can do to try and stop those bad habits or bad addictions is know the consequences of these bad habits, as we mentioned with the Quranic ayat earlier. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam also mentioned in the Quran al-Hikam, subjugate your souls to abandon their habits, drive them to perform acts of obedience, make them bear the burdensome consequences of their actions. Make them bear the burdensome consequences of their actions. Adorn them with the performance of noble acts and protect them against the pollution of sins. That's an interesting line. Make them bear the burdensome consequences of their actions. Next time you do something which may have been an addicted thing that you did, you may have sinned, and it may be a sin that you keep doing, you can't stop doing. That make yourself bear the consequences of this action. Think deeply about how evil this sin is. How much evil must be associated. Why did I do this sin? Have the burden, have that fear inside of you. That you are truly, and that way you will truly understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why He asked you in the first place to keep away from this sin. Adorn them with the performance of noble acts and protect them against the pollution of sins. So that's another thing. Know the consequences of these bad acts. Another thing we can do is the company we keep around us. For example, if you're someone who's addicted to saying bad language, if you're always around people saying bad language and you want to stop saying that, how are you going to change your ways? The same way, if you're addicted to some sort of drug, or you're addicted to cigarettes and you're always with people who smoke cigarettes, the access is so easy, then how are you ever going to stop? We see Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam mentioned in Bahar al-Anwar, volume 74, hadith number 3. Be warned against having a brother who wants you for greed, avoidance of fear. Instead seek the brotherhood of the pious, even if they are in the darkest of the earth, and even if you have to spend your life seeking them. Meaning, be careful who you spend your time with. Do not spend your time with someone who has you as a friend for avoidance of fear. Sometimes you see that. You see some people making friends with other people because they want someone who's less than them. They want someone where they think, okay, I'm bad, but this person's worse, so it makes me feel better about myself. Avoid those type of people. This is a toxic quality to have when seeking friends. When having friends who may think this way. No. Surround yourself with friends which don't have that access, that habit which you're trying to stop. In Quran al-Hikam, another hadith, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, the one you need to safeguard yourself against is not your brother. So if you feel when you're around someone that you need to work extra hard to stop that habit, then you know this is not the type of person that you should be spending time with in the first place. How can you expect to stop cigarettes when you're always around someone who's smoking cigarettes? Yes? That's another thing. The company around you. And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the final thing I wish to mention, which is the idea of preventing from happening in the first place, or even relapsing for Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. As I mentioned earlier about the sweet fruit, the sweet dessert, where he said that he would really think about this thing before even taking it. This is a beautiful lesson for us. Where the next time you see something, where you get offered maybe, I don't know, a really nice dessert, as this example mentions, or you get offered a job which is of double your salary, triple your salary, for example. Think about it before you do it. Think about it before you take it. Of course, I'm not saying don't take that job. But what I'm saying is, think about what effect this can happen on your soul. The same way Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would think about the effect that a dessert could have to his soul. Yes? Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam would think about every single thing offered to him, the effect it could happen to his soul, even the dessert, even a minor thing like the dessert. So think about the next thing, something happens, is offered to you. Whether it's something in your job, whether it's something in food, whether it's something in the narcotics, whether it's something in something else. Remember the effect that it may have on you. So inshallah, today we have mentioned quite a few things. So inshallah we will recap. We mentioned, for example, one of the things on how we can, the first step to stopping addictions and getting out of addictions. And addictions is something that is not just for those who are addicted to narcotics. Addictions are for those who are addicted to money, or those who are addicted to social media. There are many things you can be addicted. You can even be addicted to lying, where, for example, you may see someone else lie and you may say, what a liar, how can they lie? Or you may hear someone speaking about lying and say, yes, lying is wrong, without even understanding yourself that you lie yourself on a daily basis. You may be addicted to missing salah. Every sin can be something that can turn into a habit. So the first thing, if you find yourself that you have one of these habits, is to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that entity, is your Lord. And Allah speaks to you when He says, I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me. Indeed, I am near to him. I am closer than his jugular vein. If you believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can help you, this is the first step. The next step is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching you. Indeed, Allah is ever over you, an observer. The next step is to perform the dhikr of Allah, whether that's through salah, because salah is something on a five times a day that you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you reflect upon your own sins. And another hadith we hear that the one whose salah is accepted, if you want to know if your salah is accepted, it's a popular hadith. Then if you do a sin afterwards, if you don't commit a sin after the salah, then know that your salah is accepted. If the salah makes you a better human being after the salah, then know your salah is accepted. This is how, brothers and sisters, we should approach salah. Not in a way where it's just something to get done, something which is just a routine which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just gave us for the fun of it. Of course He didn't give it to us for the fun of it. Allah does not gain anything from our salah. It is us who gains from salah. So use this salah to the best of the ability. And then we said through fasting, because fasting allows you to really understand the greatness of the human being, what you have, the bounties that you have, the gratefulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also ittikaf. Stick away from those things on the outside world. Take some time to self-reflect. Maybe yourself. You don't need to go to a mosque in particular. You can stay at home. Cancel. Close all your phones. Put it in a box. Put it in the safe. For 2-3 days maybe. For a weekend at least. You can do it even with your family. Get a whole load of books that you're interested in reading, that you want to get through. Put it in a room. Stay in that room. Of course, have your food, water, drink. But stay away from the outside world. Have discussions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Focus on the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This way, through this self-reflection, you can truly know your Lord. Because knowing your Lord is all about knowing yourself. And through self-reflection, this is the perfect example on how knowing yourself knows your Lord. And then we mentioned, know the consequences of these bad habits. As the Quran mentions, that with wine and gambling, the same similar example. And also the company around you. Don't stay around with people. If you, for example, you want to stop smoking, you don't stay around people who stop smoking. If you want to stop being someone who's constantly obsessed with social media, you try and not stay around those people who are obsessed with social media. As Amir al-Mu'min alayhi salam says, the one you need to safeguard yourself against is not your brother. And of course, prevent it from happening or relapsing. Of course, relapse is obviously something that can happen, so always be aware of that. But prevent it from happening in the first place is something where those habits where you may have now, but there may be habits that you may be able to get in the future. So always think every time you're offered something that I'm going to look at this the same way Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam will look at a piece of dessert. That if I take this beautiful dessert, it may change my habit. If I take this amazing job that may be helping less people but I get paid more for it, maybe it'll give me a habit of some sort. So these are the things which the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and the Holy Quran gives us an idea on how to deal with certain addictions, certain habits, and how to get out of them. And we also have examples in history of individuals who had the best of habits, individuals who truly loved their Imam to the best of the potential an individual could have allegiance to their Imam. And that is the individual Sayyidah Zainab salamullahi alayha. Where on the day of Ashura, when Abu Abdullah alayhi salam was calling out, Ala hal min nasirin yansurna liwajhillah, Ala hal min da'abin yadubbu an haramin Rasulallah. Abu Abdullah, he lost all of his companions. There were no companions left, and all there was the family of Ahlul Bayt. Bani Hashim were the only members left. As he called this out, a few young boys came out of their tents, saying, Labbayka ya amma, we are at your service, O uncle. These were the sons of Sayyida Zainab, Salamullahi alayha. They asked for permission to go fight in the battlefield. Aba Abdullah said, how can I give you permission when you are my nephews? Sayyida Zainab said to them that I will not accept you back if you do not go and fight in the way of Allah. They both were given permission finally after they cried for a while with their uncle, and as they went out into the battlefield they fought together, Awn and Muhammad. As they fought together, the enemy saw that this was the grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib, this was the nephew of Imam al-Hussein, this was the nephew of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. Some riwayas say that Abbas was watching, Al-Hussein was watching with a smile on their face, saying, these are our nephews which we taught how to fight. They fought very bravely until an enemy said that we must separate them, for whenever one gets attacked, the other one comes to defend him, and whenever the other one gets attacked, the other one comes from behind to defend him. We see how these individuals fought together like true brothers for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. After Sayyida Zainab alayhim salam gave this beautiful love of the Imam in their heart, they fought very bravely until they were separated. As they were separated, an evil man came from behind and they struck Awn on his head, making him call out for his father, for his uncle, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. The other one was, Muhammad was struck as well, and they both called out. The enemy was surrounding both the bodies. As they came to the bodies of Awn and Muhammad, Aba Abdullah alayhim salam came to Awn, and Awn said to him, Assalamu alayka ya uncle, peace be with you, O uncle. I wish for you to go to my brother and be with him as he is also breathing his last. This was the love between the two brothers of Ali Muhammad. As they were both killed, they were brought back to the camp. There was a wailing in the tents, but Sayyida Zainab did not come out to see the bodies of her sons. Why did Sayyida Zainab not come out? Sayyida Zainab did not want Aba Abdullah to see her face. Sayyida Zainab did not want Aba Abdullah to feel bad from seeing the face of his sister. This is the devotion Sayyida Zainab has to Imam al-Hussein. But Sayyida Zainab at another point in Ashura did come out of her tent wailing. What point was that on the day of Ashura? When Aba Abdullah came to his son Ali al-Akbar and he said, Wadayatana ba'dak. He said, Oh Ali ibn Ali al-Akbar, how is this life worth living after you? Sayyida Zainab came out seeing that Aba Abdullah was going to die from the grief of losing his son. So she distracted him by saying, Wa Aliya wa Akbara, oh my nephew Ali al-Akbar. This is how Sayyida Zainab was committed to the Imam of her time. Imam al-Hussein wasn't just a brother to her. Sayyida Zainab saw Imam al-Hussein as the Imam of her time. We see after the day of Ashura that Awn and Muhammad were not mourned by her mother. Why were they not mourned? Because Sayyida Zainab had an obligation that she set upon herself, that Imam al-Hussein set upon her, that she must look after the women and children. When did she mourn her two sons? The riwayah says when they were let out of the prisons and she was allowed to return to Medina. Sayyida Zainab went into her house and she went into the room where the two boys would sleep, and she would begin crying, weeping for Awn and Muhammad, giving thanks to Allah to accept her sacrifice. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-aliyyul azim, wa inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.